Welcome on everyone to a 15 and 60 on the Western Conference. The All-Star break is over. We're starting to get a look at some of these new players on new teams. That'll be a theme of today's show. And of course, a lot of these teams back in action as the stretch drive has begun. So we're going to go through each of the 15 teams in the Western Conference, God willing, assuming my body holds up to that, and talk at least some about where they're at right now and do some analysis, whether it's a game, whether it's a breakdown of certain players, whatever we want to look at, offense, defense of that team, whatever basically piqued our interest over the last couple of weeks. So let's begin, Danny, with the Houston Rockets.
The Rockets are now 34 and 21. They're 12 and 8 in their last 20 games. Their plus 5.9 clean the glass net rating is fifth in the NBA. They're eighth on offense, fifth on defense, and ESPN's BPI projects the Rockets to finish with 51 wins, which would be the 3 seed in the West.
So against the New York Knicks, the Houston Rockets led it 93-75 early in the fourth quarter. That's usually when Kevin Durant sits on the bench. And you felt like they were pretty well in control. They'd been controlling the Knicks offense and getting enough on their own offensive end as well. And then everything fell completely apart for them. They were only able to score 14 points thereafter, some of that coming at the end when the Knicks were in control. And Ime Udoka had some pointed comments after the game, talking about how he just was aghast at the lack of ball movement. And, you know, I spared myself going back to 2022 to see whether he had the exact same comments after all of their playoff losses when he was with the Boston Celtics. And their offense really struggled, of course, in the playoffs last year against Golden State. And while I think Ime Udoka is a very good coach and he's completely changed the culture in Houston, and he did a good job in his 1 year in Boston as well, you and I have noted forever that particularly at the end of games, their offenses are under Ime Udoka just have not been very good, whether it's in Boston, whether it's Jalen Green, whether it's KD, whoever it is. And so I wanted to go take a look at why it was that the Houston Rockets couldn't score against New York last night, which is a decent defense. They have some good players, but also they're not one of the best. So we talked about this some. There are a number of factors that really stood out to me. We talked about this some in the Boston game that we did for the strategy stream, where Boston blew out Houston right before the break. Alperen Sengun, you said, well, lots of teams are going to watch film of this and see that Alperen Sengun is struggling. And actually, since the new year, his numbers have not been very good relative to his standards. And again, we saw Karl-Anthony Towns, who did a pretty good job, by the way, he's not known for this, pressuring up against Alperen Sengun and all these plays. Remember that first game of the season against OKC, we were so impressed. Alperen Sengun is being guarded by Alex Caruso and was able to maintain his dribble and back him down. And also, of course, Alperen Sengun hit a bunch of threes. That is not even close to being part of his repertoire anymore now. And so Karl-Anthony Towns really pressured him up. And on the plays where Sengun was initiating, he was catching way out by midcourt. He was struggling to get in position, struggling to run anything. This was particularly before Durant came back in the first half of the quarter. And Karl-Anthony Towns was bothering his dribble. Sengun just really looked ugly. He was laboring to get in a position, had a couple of turnovers, trying to go at Towns. Both of them looked really ugly. One, he tried to spin baseline, didn't really get anywhere, and threw a duck of a pass to the weak side. Another time, he had spent 15 seconds trying to get into position, tried to drive along the lane line, and got it easily stripped away as he was trying to draw a foul. And, of course, they were initiating very late in the shot clock. So that was one thing that really stood out to me. They were able to attack his dribble and pressure him. And I think he's big enough that if you try to pressure him with a small guy, he's able to deal with that and just get to the spots he wants to get to. If he's being guarded by the other team's center, which, of course, now because he can't play with Steven Adams anymore, it's going to happen even more often, then it's not going to go really well. So that was one thing that stood out to me. Of course, the usual getting into actions way too late in the half court. This is one of the league's worst transition teams. And so when they did get into stuff earlier, it looked a little bit better. Now they were missing some threes too. That was not. There are some shots that they could have made a little bit better. That's usually what's going to happen when you have these big comebacks. But a lot of it was just very ugly. Then another thing that stood out to me was Dorian Finney-Smith, whom they're now relying on. They're trying to get him back into things. He just looks really, really bad. He doesn't look like he really looks kind of more power forward size. He doesn't look svelte. He doesn't play like a wing anymore. They basically had him guarding Towns a lot because Sengun just gave up a wide open corner three to Towns for no reason. And Udoka got a little frustrated with him and took him out. Came back with him late, but he didn't do anything at that point. So he was trying to guard Karl-Anthony Towns in the post. That went okay. Towns scored a couple of buckets on him, but then Finney-Smith just not able to make shots. He had a couple of plays where he caught the ball along the baseline and were just a very long way removed from when he was flying in for offensive rebounds back in his Dallas days for dunks and stuff. He just would get the ball in the lane and just have no chance of doing anything, end up having to kick it out, turn it over, miss a layup. So that really hurt. And Houston was, Amen Thompson wasn't really able to get anything going either. That was the next thing that stood out to me. And this is something that we've been very focused on with Alperen Sengun, with Amen Thompson since the beginning of the season, is that he's just not really able to take advantage other than maybe offensive rebounding of matchups, right? So the Knicks closed it with Jose Alvarado, Jalen Brunson, Landry Shamet all on the floor. Mikal Bridges on the bench. And Houston just couldn't bully those guys at all. And a lot of that was Amen Thompson being guarded by the likes of Landry Shamet, Brunson, who ended up taking 2 charges in the last 5 minutes, and also Alvarado. And you would hope Amen Thompson, watch some Denny Avdia film and find a way to just use those Euro steps, knock him backwards and score, because instead he'll kind of turn his back to goal. Like, he just doesn't have the feel for getting all the way to the basket against a team that's not a good rim protecting team. So that stood out to me as well, the inability to take advantage of that. Then I would also say a lack of intentionality. To me, the obvious way that you want to work, there's one of two things that you want to do. Either Sengun or Kevin Durant involved in screening action against the small guards, or I would say Durant and Sengun working against Karl-Anthony Towns in pick and roll, who's not a great pick and roll defender. And they did that a couple of times. The Knicks were able to avoid the switch, but many times they just weren't getting into any kind of action at all. It was just Sengun trying to go one-on-one against Towns, or even worse, KD trying to go one-on-one against OG Anunoby, who might basically be generated in a lab as the one guy that you want to guard KD with one-on-one. And KD could score him at least a little bit, but everyone else on the floor, they had 4 guys on the floor who couldn't guard Kevin Durant and one guy who could, and yet KD is somehow taking all of his shots over Anunoby. So they were just taking too long to get into stuff. They didn't know what they wanted to get to. Guys couldn't take advantage of their matchups, and they ended up in some of the hardest stuff that they're going to do. They weren't able to do anything on the offensive glass either, and missed a few threes as well. But most of it really was just they weren't able to generate good shots at all.
And for Houston, some of your things that were true in the fourth quarter weren't necessarily true over the entire game. Like, the Rockets had a 40% offensive rebound rate in the game against the Knicks, but in crunch time, they didn't. And same thing with the three-pointer. Like, they made it overall, but they didn't make it in crunch time. And I've been thinking a lot, and I got asked about this. I did a Discord chat on Friday and got asked about Ime Udoka. And one of the things that I've been thinking about since that is this idea of kind of his limitations with this team, and the Ime Udoka's offense having not having as much not having as much activity and all that stuff, and how that feeds into Kevin Durant, because Kevin Durant can kind of get into his own world, and he's better in that world than basically anybody else, but he can also benefit from everything else. And so that's something that I've been thinking about. And then the other one, you brought up Dorian Finney-Smith, and it's just a little bit funny that it's the Rockets again. But I think back to those teams, as great as they were against the Warriors, and it's this idea that when 3-and-D guys lose it, and I'm not saying Finney-Smith has lost it forever. We'll see if he can be better physically later on. When they lose it, they can lose it so fast. And the reason why the Rockets came up is because the Rockets had a ton of those guys at a couple of different iterations. And sometimes it's like, oh, this guy's a staple here. And then all of a sudden he's like out of the league in 2 years. And it's just such an unusual thing for players who seem as established as they are.
Yeah, coming off the foot surgery, obviously, that has a big part of it as well. Now, maybe Finney Smith can play his way back into shape and be a factor in the playoffs, but they are actually short 3-and-D players at this point in time. And they tried to go some with Jabari Smith at center. They tried to even go with Finney Smith at center. And obviously, Şengün, none of those really seemed to work. Jalen Brunson hit 3 ridiculous shots. I think all of them but one was on Jabari Smith Jr. off of switches. So, yeah, Knicks, a great comeback by them. Also, I just thought this was pretty noteworthy that the Rockets are 28th in 2-point percentage.
Ooh.
Which you would think, hey, this isn't a great 3-point shooting team. I get that, but you would hope that even just with all the offensive rebounds that they get, that they could put those back and get pretty good stuff there. And, KD is a pretty good 2-point shooter. Şengün is not great, but yeah, there's really nobody else. Amen Thompson has actually been very disappointing as a 2-point shooter on anything that's not around the basket. He does take, Amen Thompson has a lot of, kind of 6 out of 15 all on twos kind of games. Well, let's turn now to a game that took place at Chase Center today. You went to it. I did not, because I was working on the rest of my research. And I was like, well, Steph Curry's not going to be there. It's at 12:30. I think I'll just stay home and watch some other games, and that'd be a better use of my time. As it turned out, Golden State beats Denver. No Steph Curry, obviously no Jimmy Butler, no Draymond Green. I think it was like $170 million worth of salary on the bench. And it was a pretty crazy game. Let's start first with the stats for these teams. And the Golden State Warriors, we'll begin with them. Golden State, now 30-27. They are 9-9 in their last 18, which, given the absences they've had, not terrible. 1.8 net rating is 13th in the NBA. They're 14th on offense, 10th on defense, and BPI likes them for the 8th seed at 43 wins, 67% chance of making the playoffs.
And you brought up some of the high-profile injuries. Also, at the Kristaps Porzingis missed this game due to what they described as illness. That with
general
illness. That when you consider
we got general illness and general soreness on the same team. yes, thank you. It's important salute there. But of course that's troubling due to his history with the Pots, because he was hoping to play more minutes. He played, I think, 17, 18 minutes on Thursday as they lost to the Spurs, although we're reasonably competitive in that game.
And so I think from Golden State's perspective, the thing that was fascinating from the outset is that the Warriors had a very good plan, and they have a lot of familiarity with Jokic and the Nuggets with their many years of kind of battling, even if they were kind of peak of their powers, each team both being healthy. That wasn't always there, but you still played them a lot. Their strengths and weaknesses. And even without Kristaps Porzingis, something that Steve Kerr went to immediately, and it bore fruit immediately, was using a stretch big, using a pick and pop big to generate open shots, because the Nuggets, with Watson and Aaron Gordon both out, they're playing very small. Like the starting lineup in this game was Jamal Murray, Christian Braun, Julian Strawther, Cam Johnson, and Jokic. And so Cam Johnson is a 3 who doesn't really play like a 3 defensively. Like, he doesn't really fit that spot. So they didn't have anybody who's burly. And so what I think David Adelman was going for was basically like, the Warriors are playing fairly small too, is, well, we have one big guy, they have one big guy. Let's put our big guy on their big guy. And Al Horford, he what he wants to do a lot of the time, and there are some exceptions, which I'll praise him for. Like, he wants to be outside the arc. He wants to create that space. And so the Warriors went out to this 11-2 lead, and almost all of it was generated by either Al Horford getting or taking an open 3 or harnessing that into something else for somebody else. There's one where he was able to get it to DeAnthony Melton. There were a couple of plays like that. And so that was it was an interesting tactical thing. And then later on, we saw, and I've criticized Kerr a lot over the years for not really changing his offense. He has his philosophy and not really changing it based on who else is on the floor. And most of the time, I think that's true, that they, their actions aren't threatening. And so without Stephen Curry drawing eyeballs and attention, the other cuts, all this other stuff doesn't really work. But it did work against the Nuggets. And I'll talk about why that matters from the Nuggets perspective later on. But the offense, yeah, it's helped by the ridiculous shooting that they had from three. They took 52 3-pointers in this game, made 21 of them, and they did it in a weird sequencing. And so, but they were getting good stuff around the basket. It's not just the 3-pointers that they made. The Warriors were 19 of 25 inside 5 feet. They're playing the Denver Nuggets, and they only had one fewer shot inside 5 feet. They actually got fouled inside 5 feet more than the Nuggets did because Jokic's fouls he drew were outside on the floor. And so I've talked a lot like Kerr. Like I think that he's not malleable enough. And going back even to the KD, Stephen Curry, Novocaine, if I to talk about him in two separate segments, like that they didn't go to that enough, and like he kind of has what he wants to do. But I thought it did really work on Sunday in this game. And then the other big dynamic that was just so important to the Warriors' win was Brandon Podziemski. And Brandon Podziemski, he was 1 of 10 from the field in the first 3 quarters. I thought that he had some of the mistakes that really kind of like when I thought the Warriors were going to lose it. Like Denver did a better job kind of staying home and understanding what the Warriors wanted to do in that third quarter, helped by Golden State going 0 for 14 on threes in just the third quarter. But Podziemski, like he was just kind of out of sorts. He wasn't really generating many advantages. He was, as I said, 1 for 10 from the field. And then he plays the entire fourth quarter because he gets 15 points on 6 of 6 from the field, has 8 rebounds and 2 assists, plus 17 in just that fourth quarter. The Warriors outscored him 33-16, which is how they won this game going away when they trailed going into the fourth quarter. And so some of it was just fluky. I mean, this counts his skill maybe a little bit too much, but like he had this ridiculous high-arcing floater over Jamal Murray from the free throw line that you're just like, oh, there's no chance that's going in. He had another kind of like fadeaway shot that was ridiculous, but he played with energy, he played with intention, he made his jumpers in that quarter, and he also was, I thought there was he was a great example of one of the other deficiencies that Denver's defense had, which was there was this play where Strother was guarding Podziemski, and Strother basically backs away from Podziemski a little bit. He's off ball, but like backs away from him a little bit. Strother's not helping on anything, and you're not worried about Podziemski driving. The most threatening thing about him is him shooting a clean catch and shoot 3-pointer. Like that is the best thing that he can do. And so instead, that's what he gets. He gets a kind of a shooting drill 3-pointer that helps kind of get the Warriors back into touch. And so I thought Golden State did a really good job executing what they needed to do. And then the other thing, you brought up that Draymond Green didn't play in this contest. I think that overall, Draymond is certainly not the player he was at the peak of his powers and all that. But I do think in this specific game against this specific opponent, not having Draymond, with Steph being out in particular, helped because it forced the Warriors to engage differently offensively. It gave the Nuggets fewer places to kind of hide, and Draymond can sometimes kind of get sucked into these non-Curry games. He also can sometimes get ejected in these non-Curry games. And I thought that the Warriors, that it kind of forced them to approach every possession a little bit more zealously, and I thought that actually really helped them. Then the other reason...
one thing I can hit on there too, I mean, I think he was a late scratch, so that may have changed and Porzingis was as well. So I think from Denver's standpoint, Denver also had played, I think, the previous night. So Golden State was fresher. And so that did kind of leave them with nowhere to put Nikola Jokic. And Golden State actually did a lot of pick and roll, according to Synergy, in this game, more so than you would normally see. Pick and roll ball handler, I guess you could call them direct picks as per Synergy's hand tracking, was 41 pick and roll ball handler plays, including passes, and then 10 pick and roll man plays for Golden State, only 4 for Denver, where they usually are going to excel. And Al Horford probably defends Jokic in the post better than just about anyone. And the fact that he was able to space him out, get some of those some of those pick and roll man plays obviously are pick and pop plays for Horford. So they actually, with Denver being so small, they didn't really have anyone out there in their starting lineup who was going to get over a screen. And so I think that actually mattered, that, you're not going to like have Jokic way out on the floor blitzing people or anything. And so Golden State was able to be effective in that way and at least get themselves some open threes. The crazy thing to me looking at the stat sheet though is 64% on twos by Golden State that's just pathetic defense by the Denver Nuggets against this version of Golden State. And yeah, Golden State was hitting a bunch of threes early. That might have been part of it. Another thing was 41 transition points and 30 transition plays. That's something that Kerr talked about after the game, that their game plan was just really to try to run Denver as much as possible. So I think they did come in with a pretty good game plan, and Denver, they shot pretty poorly from three, but they should be able to put up better than a 109 offensive rating. And then the other thing that stands out to me too is Nikola Jokic. We talked about it. He had an amazing game over the weekend in that ridiculous win by was it 157 to 103 or something against Portland? But he had another 5 turnovers in this game as well. So I wanted to ask you what you saw from him. I mean, he did have the 35 point, 20 rebounds and 12 assists in this one, but was a -6 and did have the 5 turnovers.
So at halftime of this game, going down in the media room, when I was talking with another media member, and I said, it's so wild to be saying this. Jokic was 1 assist away from a first half triple double. And this is mostly on the defensive end, but I'm like, he's been a big part of why Denver's been struggling in this game. And a lot of that was the defensive issues that we were talking about before. Jokic was not really defending his guy on the floor, but then even when he was staying back, he wasn't really deterring anything. And the play that was the sequence that I think was most effective. I have some angry notes, as I often do, about oh, they need to take Jokic out of the action. They could have put, even though they weren't starting Spencer Jones, you can put somebody small around Al Horford. He'll beat you sometimes, but he's not going to beat you every time. But then at one point later in the game, David Adelman did that more often. There was one sequence that really sticks to my mind, where they put him on Guy Santos. Guy Santos is a limited, inconsistent shooter overall. And in consecutive possessions, Santos hits an open three and then beats Jokic on a cut and scores a layup. And that is a problem because Denver, in their current state, they don't have the guys that clean up messes. And Jokic is this special offensive player, but you need to put other things around him. We've talked about how he can elevate limited offensive players to make them much better than they are. We get numerous examples over the years. But you also need some of those defenders to make the defense palatable, viable. And they just don't really have those guys in rotation. Bruce Brown's taken a couple of steps back. He had a couple of good plays. He had 3 steals in this game. And Christian Braun has his moments, but he's not as consistent there either.
Well, it's good at least to see him getting back to some of the stuff that he was doing before last year, because he basically has been out for most of the season, tried to come back, and then they had to shut him down again. So did he look better athletically to you than he did in that first attempt coming back?
Yes, I think that he did. And I wasn't thinking about his ankle as much as I did in some of the earlier times when I've watched the Nuggets. So that is a positive for Brown. And then, but Jokic, that I think is a big part of the story for why his individual efficiency was so off. He was 11 of 21 from the field. He was 8 of 17 on twos. And he's normally this otherworldly 2-point finisher. And the Warriors were doing a good job with Horford, but also with Quentin Post, who I thought did a nice job. And he's improved as a defender too, getting into Jokic. And Jokic, he had 6 offensive rebounds, and so a lot of those were on his own misses, paying tribute to his teammate Jonas Valanciunas. But it's that they were in his space, and that was part of what was leading to the turnovers as well. And so they were doing that. But Jokic seemed out of sorts, and I was, I had some kind of doom and gloom on Nugget stuff in that Discord chat on Friday, and I downplayed it because the Nuggets, they're not healthy. We all know that, and that they're and we're still 2 months from the playoffs, and so the idea is basically yes, there are some problems right now, but these are things that can resolve with time and availability and all that stuff. I stand by everything I said. but they are in a worse place right now seeing it in person than I thought. And where that really matters is just, winning games, game in, game out. And you don't want to put too much on this. I mean, they beat the Blazers by 50, a couple days ago, 54. But they have had some of these, you know, dispiriting losses, or just like a little bit or more than a little bit flat. And so those matter in seeding, those matter in all these sorts of things. And so even if I believe, and I do, that the Nuggets will be right, barring further injuries when it matters most, you still need to actually get there. And I thought that Adelman was a little bit, he had a couple of other ones. I brought up the Jokic being on Horford and all that. One of the other things that I thought was a notable issue is that Jamal Murray deserves so much credit for how much better he and the Nuggets have been offensively with Jokic off the floor this year. And it's different when he's out of the game entirely versus when it's just the non-Jokic minutes in a Jokic game.
Yeah.
But I think Jamal Murray's been better in both. And in this game, one of the decisions that Adelman made, and I thought it worked in the first half, but it didn't work. It worked statistically, but you could see the problems with it. Was that they didn't do a full, they largely tied Jamal Murray and Jokic's minutes together. Jokic plays the whole first, Jamal Murray doesn't. But by and large, there's an extended stretch, usually at the beginning of the second and fourth quarters, where neither one of those guys is on the floor. And in the second quarter, they didn't get killed in that stretch. I thought they did okay, but it seemed a little bit lucky. And then he went back to it in the fourth. And at first, because that's when the Warriors came back, they were down 101-95, and it had been worse than that, a couple points in the third quarter. And I'm like, okay, we'll see how this works without Jokic and Murray on the floor together. Goes to it again, and their offense is just totally stagnant. They're not really getting anything from Bruce Brown. They're like, there isn't really that other initiator. And that is a weakness of this team, is that they just don't have that many guys that can handle the ball. They can put pressure on the defense. But they go to that. And so the Warriors, they cut that deficit all the way down. And so I'm like, okay, but still, the Warriors, okay, they got this nice run. They got back into the game with Jokic off the floor. And then, so I'm like, okay, well, that's, they got back into it. Good for them. And then the Warriors go on this 10-0 run in about minute 45, minute 50. And they just take the game over. And that stretch, I think, was some of, them making some shots that were hard, and the Nuggets missing some shots that they normally make. But I thought that Adelman, he didn't give his team kind of the theory of the lineup stuff. I thought was pretty bad from him in this game. And it's hard when you're shorthanded, but it's not like the Nuggets were more shorthanded in terms of their best players than the Warriors were. And there were some things that were disappointing to me, as I think the way that I'd put it. And then on the disappointing front, overall, there were the Nuggets won. They did well overall in the possession game. They forced more turnovers than the Warriors did. They had more offensive rebounds, but there were a couple of big plays late. There was one where De'Anthony Melton just fired a three over Jokic. He had enough space to take it off, and Jokic is on the floor. They're playing small other than him. None of the other Nuggets get into position for the defensive rebound. Brandon Podziemski gets a putback, and the lead's back to 10. And it's just those sorts of plays. And I was disappointed in the Nuggets' approach, and I was disappointed in their execution and their effort too.
Yeah, they are now 4-6 since Nikola Jokic has returned. So that has not been a panacea. Obviously, almost all of that has been without Peyton Watson. All of it has been without Aaron Gordon. Another interesting thing about the Nuggets, and we've been tracking this all season, is that by our numbers, where we look at clutch expectation based on whether you're up, whether you're down, whether you're tied, whatever, as you enter the clutch in the last 5 minutes of a 5-point game, the Denver Nuggets are one of the worst clutch teams in basketball this year. This is coming into today when it was tied at 109 when Jokic came back in, and Golden State immediately went on a 10-0 run to put the game out of reach. The Nuggets are 14-14 in the clutch, which is 2.5 wins lower than expectation. That is one of the worst marks in the NBA, only Memphis at negative 3.0. Yeah, I think that's right. They are the, and Brooklyn at negative 4.4. Those are the two teams. And Houston is negative 3.7, who we already talked about their issues. So a bottom 4 clutch performance this season by the Denver Nuggets, where you always felt like if they were close at the end, the Jokic-Murray pick and roll, or Murray-Jokic pick and roll was going to bring them home. Denver is now 36-22, 11-9 in their last 20, but as I noted, just 4-6 since Jokic returned. They're 9th in net rating at 4.1, number 1 on offense, 122, but 23rd on defense. We saw that in stark relief in this game. And they project for the 3 seed at 51-31, but they're quite in a morass in the 21, 22, 23 loss range with LA, with Minnesota, and Houston as well. And it certainly would behoove them to get that 3 seed and avoid Oklahoma City until the conference finals. Let's actually talk about those Oklahoma City Thunder now, Danny.
After their win on Sunday against the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Thunder are 44-14, 12-7 in their last 19. Still first in clean the glass net rating plus 12.2, 4th on offense, 1st on defense. And Thunder projected to win 61 games. They would be the number 1 seed, of course, in the West.
Yes, I did have their under of 62 wins. How prescient I'm looking. I'm guessing they're still going to go over, though. And today was a big part of that. When I was on the warm-up with Rosgold and Wude on Friday, Oklahoma City was going up against Brooklyn at home, and they were big favorites to win that game. They did. But the thing I emphasized was just relying on their defense and forcing turnovers and staying solid and forcing the opponent to beat them. And that wasn't quite what took place against Cleveland. Really nice win for OKC. They came out early, led by about 20. They're shooting the shit out of it from 3-point range and turning over Cleveland as well, getting some runouts. Then Cleveland was able to get back into it, tied it. I think it was at 84, and you felt like, all right, well, Cleveland is doing much better here. They can't hit a 3. OKC is hitting everything, but they hit enough threes, and they defended well enough to actually end up taking this game regardless. Really nice win for them. First loss for the Cavs in the James Harden era. One thing that I wanted to take a look at, especially seeing that he had 10 assists against the Cavs, was to see whether there's more to Cason Wallace on offense. And I've said that a few times, that when he puts the ball on the floor, and especially when he gets out in transition, it can look really good for him. And, you know, he is a guard, and he's probably been their main guy on the perimeter because they're not starting Jared McCain. We'll talk about him briefly in a second. But so Cason Wallace did have 10 assists in this game. I wanted to take a look at what his stats were since Shea went down. Has played a couple of games with Jalen Williams in that stretch, but Jalen Williams then went out again with the hamstring. AJ Mitchell's been on the shelf this entire time. But these stats, Danny, if you look at particularly the self-creation stuff for Cason Wallace, these that I put in here are since Shea went down. Not a ton of indication that he is ready to potentially take the next step as a ball handler.
It doesn't seem too encouraging. I mean, a little bit over 0.5, so half a point per play as pick and roll ball handler. I mean, isolation's actually been somewhat successful, but it's I mean, a lot of this stuff, especially the things that are more on him making things happen, that's definitely not going. And I think some of the spot ups, some of the threes, like that stuff will be better than it has been. But the more self-created, the initiator stuff being as bad as it is not encouraging.
Yeah, his overall numbers since Shea went down, 47% true shooting, so about 10 points below the league average. A big part of that is he's not hitting his threes. He's 6 of 29 on threes, and it's not like he's taking them all off the dribble in that time either. He's 5 of 23 on catch and shoots. As I watched some of the film of him, he is a really likes to get to his left hand mostly as a driver. The big thing that stuck out to me is he can try to get all the way to the basket and finish, but he doesn't have a lot of change of pace. He doesn't have a lot of craft, and his floaters just look like they're gonna like brick off the backboard or hit way on the back rim. Not really able to have any kind of in-between game at all. It's basically just go right to the basket. Now, I think where he's been the most successful is just keeping his dribble alive, gnashing along the baseline. He had a couple of nice assists, including it in this game to Isaiah Hartenstein coming down the lane for that little floater. In transition, he's been pretty effective still, and can push it in transition, finish, or has made the right passes there. And so, he's playing with Chet Holmgren. He's playing with a space floor. Hartenstein's a good passing big, pick and roll big. But I haven't really seen all that much to indicate that, because he's going to be a very interesting player for OKC in terms of his extension talks this offseason. Would another team try to poach him? He's one of the best steal guys, obviously, in the league. He can guard up a lot. His jumper is kind of wax and wane, but I think it'll be at least a reasonably effective weapon for him. But if another team were to trade for him or try to poach him in restricted free agency, what are they getting? Haven't seen much to indicate that there's a ton of evolution. Like, he does have great athleticism and his handle's okay. So there might still be more there, but I was hoping maybe, he just hasn't been showing this stuff and maybe we'll see a little bit more. Hasn't necessarily been the case. He had a couple nice alley-oops, like one to Chet out of pick and roll as Chet got behind two guys in this Cleveland game. But the 10 assists, most of them were just kind of move the ball quickly, which he can do, right? He's a good ball mover. Like, he's not, he can bring the ball up. Like, he's not totally hopeless as a guard, but definitely not, a point guard level of initiator at this point in time. But, if he could even get to kind of the level that George Hill was years ago, he's probably even better defensively than him. He will be a very, very good player, but he just needs to be next to someone like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Jared McCain, any thoughts on what's taken place with him so far?
Definitely encouraging to see him be as active and successful. And like, I did that breakdown kind of around when the trade happened, and the jumper has already gotten, he's been hot what he's been with the Thunder. But he's looked more agile. He's looked a little bit better. And like, what I, my thesis in that breakdown was basically that the film when he was on the Sixers from 2 was terrible. Like, the film was actually bad, but that it was things that could look better. And something else that Oklahoma City has is they have some good screeners. They have good spacing overall. And so I'm thrilled for McCain that he has looked as good as he has in these 5 games.
Yeah, the one thing that stood out is they have needed him to create more. A lot of it has just been making shots. He's in 5 games coming into today, 64% true shooting and 23% usage. But most of that's been on the back of making some shots. But he's been better as a 2-point finisher as well. But they haven't started him. They haven't really closed with him. He's more just been giving them a little something off the bench with some groups that they're going to be creation challenge. Really, in this game, Isaiah Joe got going with 6 of 11 from 3, and his movement shooting really provided them as one of their primary impetuses in the half court. So really nice win for them over Cleveland. Where are we going next year?
Next team alphabetically, the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, the Phoenix Suns, they've gotten some pretty rough injury news of late. We'll get to that momentarily, but they are 33-25, only 10-10 in their last 20 though. 14th in net rating at plus 1.4, 17th on offense, 9th on defense, which we will talk more about exactly how it is that they've improved that defense. They project for the 7 seed, 2 wins ahead of the Warriors with 45 wins. BPI likes them at a 70% chance of making the playoffs. Those injuries, Dylan Brooks, broken left hand in the win over the Magic. Pretty ugly loss for the Magic, frankly. No timeline yet there, but a broken hand is going to be a month at least. We'll see whether he has to have surgery or not. The hope would just be that he can return this regular season, I think is what you're looking at there. And then Devin Booker is out at least a week with what they're now calling a hip strain. It was hip soreness that had him leaving that game. So Booker has struggled with some ankle issues this season. So now they're really without their 2 best players. But they can rely, hopefully, on their defense, which has ascended from 27th last year to 9th this year. What has changed?
I want to start briefly with the off the court stuff because it's useful to kind of remember all of this. So they changed their coach from Budenholzer to Ott. They made the huge trade of Kevin Durant for Dylan Brooks and Jalen Green. Bradley Beal's gone, so they're not necessarily playing that much bigger because Colin Gillespie's taken on some of that role, but they're playing differently, and Gillespie's been more engaged defensively than Bradley Beal was last year. And they also, I think this is an important place. They have a very different center rotation. So last year, Yusuf Nurkic only played 25 games for them. Mason Plumlee played 1,300 minutes. Oso Guidara played a little over 1,000. Nick Richards played 800. This year, Mark Williams, who was not on the team last year, he's played 1,200. Iguodala's already played more this year than he did last year. He's over 1,100 now. And then Nick Richards, before he was traded, had a small role in it. And Malawach has only played 115 total minutes for the team this year. They haven't needed him, but notable that he hasn't done it. And so there's some of this that I think is real, and some of it that I think isn't. And the place that I always start when a team is significantly different on defense is opponent shooting luck. And that is, unfortunately for the Suns, an important part of the story. Now, part of it is that they were intensely unlucky last year. Last year, they had the fourth highest opponent three-point percentage, 37.6%. That was over a percent stronger than the league average. So you expect that to regress to the mean. It more than has, because now they went from fourth highest to third lowest. They're 34.6. That's 1.5% below the league average. So they're now more lucky than they were unlucky last year. And if all you do is you shift their opponent three-point percentage, I did just like very quick calculations to last year's attempt rate, the defensive rating would jump 3.2 points per 100 possessions. Just like I just did the very quick and dirty there. So yeah, that's a big part of that overall shift. But a lot of the other things are real positives. And last year, and this is, some of this is as good of a coach as I think Mike Budenholzer is. This is one of his weaknesses. Last year, the Suns forced turnovers. They were the third lowest, 12.3% of opponent possessions. They went from third lowest to third highest at 16.8. And Phoenix, I brought up how they had some real personnel turnover, but last year, no Sun with over 500 minutes played had a steal rate over 2%. They had a couple guys who did, but none of them played enough. Gillespie played 461. He was the guy who had the highest steal rate. This season, in a shorter time, so there are fewer players who have the sample, there are 6 Phoenix Suns who played over 500 minutes and have a steal rate over 2%. Jordan Goodwin, Gillespie, Oso Guidara, Grayson Allen, Ryan Dunn, and Royce O'Neal. And
yeah, I mean, it's remarkable just because they're not playing nearly as many bad defenders as they were last year. I don't know that there's anyone you look at as like being unbelievable, although we'll talk about some of these guys as being pretty good. But that's something that sticks out, that everyone who's out there is someone who's going to at least give a high effort level, which I would say you probably couldn't say last year.
Well, and on top of that, they're being asked to do it more because 5 of those 6 Suns with an over 2 steal rate were on the team last year. Only Goodwin was in a different place. And so like some of those guys were relatively marginalized, but they were still there. Right. And they're being more active, forcing turnovers. Some of the other parts are pretty fascinating. So I like that we have different ways of quantifying the same idea. So the shot mix, the shots that opponents are taking in terms of location on the floor, is pretty similar and actually statistically a little bit worse. Like opponents are taking better shots, worse for the Suns defense this year than last year. Fewer threes, but more around the basket, higher foul rate. But that doesn't tell the whole story. And this is, I had a theory on this and then it ended up being borne out by some of the stats that we have to work with. So last year, the opponents had a simple shot quality of 54.9%. So that's the effective field goal percentage considering a variety of factors for their guys. And opponents had a shot making that was positive 0.3.
And to be clear, just for people who are new to the show, this is a proprietary metric that we have to measure shot quality. It's based on when it takes place in the shot clock, whether it's off the dribble or not, where it's from, of course, and whether it is contested or not. So it's about the best metric that's going to be out there publicly for a team. It's not going to measure perfectly exactly how contested it is necessarily. And it's also player agnostic for the other team. But that's our the best metric that we have with publicly available data that Seth Partnow put together for us years ago that shows as best we can what quality of shots a player or a team are taking or giving up in this case.
Thank you very much. And so on that, so they gave up that percentage, and opponents made more than you would have expected. So they gave a better shot quality. So this year, even though the location data is a little bit worse because of proximate opponent and all that sort of stuff, the Suns by simple shot quality are giving up a harder shot dive. It drops expected effective field goal percentage drops 0.5%. And then they also the shot making, which you could say that's a little bit more fluky. They're a little bit worse there. So I think they are really giving up hard shots. And then the other thing that I found fascinating, so there was a point early in the season because I didn't do a full segment on this, but I was interested in it. I did my own digging, just because I do that for the Suns. Was like they had some really good rim protection numbers. I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because you wouldn't think that. I've never been the biggest, like Mark Williams is a huge dude, but he's not agile and all that stuff. And the overall numbers on the rim protection aren't fantastic. They're giving up the 5th highest opponent field goal percentage inside 5 feet, which is the line that we think is most useful there. And their attempt rates aren't fantastic either. But some of the individual players grade out kind of well. Some of that is due to some classifications. So Oso Guidaro, who now is pretty much playing center. There are some times where he does it. 29% contest rate, 56% field goal percentage on the shots he contests, and 30 rim attempts per 100 possessions. Those numbers are worse, but
30
not
rim attempts per 100 possessions for opponents, which is that's
yeah.
maybe a little bit better than average, that one. So that's just when this guy's on the floor, how many rim attempts per 100 possessions does the other team have? That's not necessarily that he's challenging them, that's just how many they are taking. So it kind of more measures the deterrence effect of it rather than what he's actually contesting. And the 29% contest rate that he's contesting those specifically within 5 feet of all the shots that are taken within 5 feet, he's contesting 29% of those and allowing 56%. So relatively there, that number, the average for a center, which is basically what he's been, is usually going to be in like the high 50s. So that's a little bit better. But when you consider also his ability to switch, and the fact that he's kind of a smaller player, that's a pretty good number for Oso.
Yeah, and as a point of reference, they don't fill exactly the same defensive role, but those numbers, 29% contest, 56% field goal, like that's not that far off of what Evan Mobley's numbers have been for the Cavs this year. So that's definitely interesting. And then on the other side of that coin, Mark Williams has struggled relatively, so he has a higher contest rate, but opponents are shooting 65% on the shots around the basket that he contests. That's ridiculously high. And you see that also in the kind of the overall numbers when Mark Williams is on the floor. The attempt rate relative to Oso Guidaro, the attempt rate for around the rim is lower. Like teams take a higher proportion of shots around the rim when Iguodara's on the floor, but they're converting. And so this includes the ones that Mark Williams does not contest. 71.5% field goal percentage on shots around the rim when he's on the floor. And there's they're defending about 3 points per 100 possessions worse with Mark Williams on the floor, and that's not explained by 3-point variance. They're close-ish in that respect. So the Suns don't defend the same way with Williams and Iguodala on the floor. But the idea that like there was a point in the year I'm like, oh, is Mark Williams turning over a new leaf defensively as he do, because we know his limitations. And at least statistically, and this matches my eye test, the Suns are doing a lot better, but it's not because he's been superlative defensively.
Yeah, John and I had a discussion about the Lakers rescinding the trade and whether that was a good idea for Mark Williams, and then also how the Suns traded that 2031 pick to Utah that then became one of the centerpieces of Utah's bid for Jaren Jackson Jr. And then, of course, 2 of those 3 bad picks that they got back, they ended up trading for Mark Williams. Anything else on these guys, or shall we move on here?
I think we can move on.
Let's talk about Portland.
The Portland Trailblazers actually beat the Suns in this gross 92-77 game on Sunday. So that pushes Portland up to 28-30, 9-10.
So is that so Portland allowed less than half of the points that they had allowed the previous night to the Nuggets?
I believe it was 2 nights before, but yes.
Yeah, it was 157 down to 77.
Yeah, the Suns shot
That's
9 of 35 from 3 and 44% on twos.
so I wanted to check in on Shaedon Sharpe, who was a darling for me. I actually, in a draft that I didn't like that much in 2022, I ranked him as my number one prospect. I would not do that on a redraft at this point in time. But I wanted to check in on him both film and stats wise. And certainly he's been asked to do way too much this season relative to what his current level of skill is. He's got a 30% usage. That's just like a crazy number. He's not, that's something you usually see from a premium creator, or maybe one of these guys who comes off the bench and their role is entirely just to gun. And so 72% of his field goals are self-created, and he's not, doesn't have the skill level to support that at this point in time. Now, he is a very good finisher. Obviously, I think that's one thing that has probably improved the most for him, I would say, where early on in his career, yeah, he was a great leaper. He's actually has already lost some of that pop, I think, if you go back and look at some of his film in his rookie year. I'm not sure whether it's the groin surgery. He's not really old enough that should be the case yet, that he's lost some pop. And he still is, obviously a great leaper, but he doesn't have quite the highlight reel these last couple of years as he had as a rookie. So that's worth keeping an eye on. But in terms of statistically, he's gotten much, much better as a finisher as time has gone, particularly as a contested finisher. But the thing that stuck out to me the most watching him is just that when he is attacking someone one-on-one, there really aren't any matchups where the defense is like, oh, this is a fire with alarm fire. Like, he's going to get a great shot. We just are not going to be able to stop this guy. Most of the time, no matter who he is attacking, it's probably going to devolve into some kind of a step back, often a step back three, which he's capable of making, but not at a crazy rate, right? He is at 39% on uncontested threes, but 31% contested. And then even more importantly, perhaps, is that he's at 36% on long twos, almost all of which are off the dribble this season. And most of them are either in isolation or pick and roll. And career, he's still at 39.6% on long twos. So with the way his game is structured, he needs to be an unbelievable shooter from that range. And then, even if he has a defender on him that's, maybe a worse defending point guard, someone of that ilk, a lot of times it's going to be a step back. The other thing that really stood out to me is that when he receives the ball, whether he has the advantage or not, he's always just taking a beat and not just ripping it through and going. And this is something going back to his film that was one of the biggest issues that DraftNix had with him, was that he didn't have just the absolute quickest first step in the world. And particularly when he's just going to hold the ball for 1 second before he actually decides to do something and start trying to get downhill, that's an issue. When he does get downhill, he doesn't cover that much ground with his first step. He's a 2 dribble guy into the lane. Going to go left most of the time. 64% of the time, he is going left per the Sport Radar tracking data. And yeah, when he gets to the basket, he can finish it pretty well. But that's, again, he's not getting downhill so quickly on a lot of these dudes where he's just getting a great shot. A lot of time he's having to settle for a step back. I thought a play that really stood out to me in their game in Washington, which they lost, he's got the last shot of the game to tie it down to in the last 20 seconds. Couldn't really get great separation against Jameer Watkins and kind of went to the right elbow, had to pump fake, fade away. And while he is a great leaper, he doesn't really get that much elevation on his jump shot. He's more reliant on the step back to create space, and he shoots more of a set shot. And even from, say, the free throw line, he's not jumping over guys, say, Jamar DeRozan style. And so, like, Jameer Watkins was able to get a great contest on him, and it wasn't really a very good shot for him. So the only guy that I saw him, I probably watched many of the last 5-6 games before he had this calf injury. The only guy I saw him really be able to beat was against Boston when Anthony Simons was still there. Of quick attack against his former teammate, ripped through, it got a layup coming down the lane. And then he also doesn't have an amazing floater game when he's moving towards the basket, doesn't get off the ground a ton on those either. So if he gets all the way there, he can go through guys' bodies. It can look pretty good. He can finish it really well. As a cutter, he's devastating, whether it's alley-oops or quick plays in transition. But he's always trying to power through guys on that second dribble instead of just blowing by them. So that was the biggest thing that stood out to me, is it's just he's not able to really cause an emergency for the defense pretty much no matter who he's being guarded by. He's generally generating a shot that the defense is willing to live with.
And so Sharpe, there's still a lot of ways that he can be a valuable player, especially somebody who can, who can do some wing things. But one of the other elements that I was intrigued by with Sharpe as a prospect was he didn't have them all the time, but he had some tantalizing defensive highlights in the like prospect film. And I don't think we've seen as much of that as I hoped, especially him being a vertical athlete. His block rate's been low. He's doing a better job generating steals this year. But like there was this, even if it was more of like a scintilla of a chance that he could be a dangerous defender. And I just haven't, he's been a part of a successful defense, but he hasn't been as much of a difference maker on that end as my more sunny outlooks were.
Yeah, and he'll get compared a lot to Jalen Green, who was drafted a year earlier than him. And I still do believe more in Sharpe's jump shot. Like, it still looks great. Hasn't got in that much yet, right? He's only 34% from three, but that it could come around at some point. You would say, though, in this his fourth year, if you're really going to see a lot from him as a shooter, if he's going to become an elite shooter, you would have seen more by now. But it can still happen for him. I think it's just less likely that it does at this point in time. And he doesn't have that blinding speed attacking. He's a much better finisher than Jalen Green because he's stronger. He's less out of control. But he also is not just blowing by guys the way that Jalen Green can. And probably doesn't have quite as good of a handle either. But both of those guys have been two of the guys I've been higher on over the years. And neither of them really developed to the level that I would have liked. One more thing to talk about with them, they converted Sidi Sissoko, who's been a nice story for them, but they waived Ryan Rupert to open up the roster spot.
Sissoko has been important for the Blazers and kind of what they've had to do this year. I'm sure they wish they didn't have to lean on him as much as they have, but due to injuries and also due to Sissoko doing well. And Rupert, I would have been like, I mean, I'm fine with this, but like I was way lower on him before this year, but he showed me a couple of signs. I think he already signed like a 10-day. I believe I saw it with someone else. Take a quick look, verify that. Yeah, he signed a 10-day with the Memphis Grizzlies. Actually.
Ah, yes. All right. Well, where are we going next year?
The Memphis Grizzlies.
Okay. Yeah, this should be interesting. They are 21-34. Huge win. Bad win, perhaps, over the Utah Jazz over the weekend, which we're going to talk about momentarily. 5-12 in their last 17. Negative 2.4 net rating is 21st. They're 20th on offense, 19th on defense. I expect both those numbers to sink like a stone. They are projected, as of right now, for 35 wins. That seems remarkably optimistic. A 4% chance to the playoffs. John has noted this in his piece that we talked about, that the number of teams that win between 40 and 50 games is way, way higher than the number of teams that win between 30 and 40 games, which you would expect wouldn't be the case. And the Memphis Grizzlies are a perfect example of why it is that occurs, because they don't have much of a team left here. So maybe you can start in their game against Utah. I guess I'll read them out. Here are your starting fives. Jemai Mashak. He plays for the Grizzlies, by the way, in case you didn't know. Jalen Wallace. All right, that's a real player. Gigi Jackson. We thought maybe he might be a real player at one point. Taylor Hendricks just came over from the Jazz. He's drafted number 9. Okay, take a look at him. That's not ridiculous. Someone named Lawson Lovering. It's not a Supreme Court case. Isaiah Collier at point guard for the Jazz. All right, he's a real player. Probably more of a backup, though. Ace Bailey, number 5 overall picture. John Conchar, yeah, hasn't really been able to get on the floor for the Grizz. They've been trying to salary dump from forever. Cody Williams and the immortal Kyle Filipowski at center. So, Danny, tell us what happened in this game so we didn't have to watch it.
I grew, and Nate knows, of course, that this can happen with me. I grew to enjoy this game because it provided an experiment for me of something that I think about every so often, which is whose game gets the most and least benefit if you just remove the 5 best players from both teams. So basically, just lower the overall talent level. And I'm going to talk about 3 main guys who it did. The first is Isaiah Collier, because doing that made Isaiah Collier, I think, for a lot of the game, he was the best player on the floor. Like, his athleticism really popped, and there was a play in transition where the ball kind of popped loose. He's on the other end of the floor, gets a hit ahead pass from Filipowski before like any Grizzlies guy like even like laced up his boots. It was incredible. And he had a couple of really nice assists, and he had, had a couple of those Isaiah Collier turnovers and everything else. But I thought he was one. Another was Kyle Filipowski, because if that my concern going back to when I saw him in high school was that Kyle Filipowski was a quadruple A player where the things he does work against inferior players, and the big man combination of Lawson Lovering and Kyle Anderson mostly qualifies under that. And then his defensive deficiencies are a huge problem. And then the other one, who I thought was actually a lot of the time he was the most encouraging player, and best I think was still Collier, was Omax Prosper. And so Omax Prosper, washed out to an extent with the Dallas Mavericks. And what was so fun about Prosper in this game was that because the Utah Jazz have this potent combination of pretty weak perimeter defense and 0 rim protection, he looked superhuman. Like, Omax Prosper scored 23 points in 30 minutes. He was 10 of 16 from the field, but some of those were threes that he wasn't great at. So he was 10 of 13 on twos. He was getting to the basket. He was driving hard. It looked great. And so what was funny is, I don't think that Omax Prosper is a better player than Jalen Wells, but I think that Prosper's game fit this matchup to a T, and he was so aggressive. Like, I think Isolo deserves a lot of credit for kind of encouraging this out of his players, if your goal is to win basketball games, which TBD. But I thought that Prosper being active, and like, I've always thought he has a little bit with the ball in his hands, but the Jazz just don't have much in the way of perimeter or interior defense in this iteration. And so I thought that he looked healthy, and the Grizzlies needed that desperately, because they, in this game, and this was in the front end of a back-to-back, they were without both Ty Jerome and Scottie Pippen Jr., both of whom missed this game, and then both of whom played.
Well, but if you're trying to win, wouldn't it make sense to stagger your 2 experienced point guards, so you don't have to play Jemai Meshack and Javon Small? That's what you should do, right? I know they're both coming back from injury, but wouldn't you just like play one in one game, one in the other game? Doesn't that make sense?
Well, they won this game anyway, so line drive in the box score.
Well, I guess so. Now they're gonna get fined, right? Just because they won.
No, they didn't win. They didn't win in Miami, so they're okay. But I thought that there was so it was interesting that these 2 games, the Grizzlies game, the Jazz game, and the Heat game, the Grizzlies actually had basically the same offensive rating. But watching all of this game and a portion of the other one, that was really because they made their threes against the Jazz, and they missed probably similar looks, a little bit worse, against the Heat. And so that makes it seem like their offense was healthier than it actually was. And so, like Jalen Wells, I brought him up before. I didn't think he was bad in this game, but he just didn't really take advantage of the limitations that the other team presented. Also, he sometimes had a better defender on him. So I thought that that Wells kind of disappeared into it. There were a few good Gigi Jackson moments. He had a really nice, nasty dunk in transition that was great, and he had a couple of other ones, and like, you saw those moments from him. And then one of the former apple of my eye, Taylor Hendricks, he's been off and on, unfortunate injuries in his career. There was one play where he drove and got a nice dunk because Kyle Filipowski was the help defender. But generally speaking, Like he doesn't have that kind of a game, at least not at this point. And we didn't see as much from Hendricks defensively as I would have liked. They're playing so small in the front court. You're like, oh, Hendricks could do it. Didn't see it much from him. But Hendricks wasn't near the biggest disappointment in this game. That for me was Cody Williams. I thought Cody Williams, like, he didn't do much, and what he did was bad. 2 and 9 from the field, but he just, like, almost every attack he had just went nowhere, and then bad things happened from it. Like, there was one where he just, like, he tried to drive, he settled, and he still got his shot blocked. Like, he couldn't even get the settle right, and he was awful in this game. And I mean, he started, and if your goal was to win games, you probably wouldn't want Cody Williams there, but you could either from a player development standpoint or from a losing games development standpoint, you can go that route. And I've really liked Vince Williams at points. He had a couple of good transition plays, but like, one of the big stories in this game for the Jazz, which is a good thing if your goal is not to win games, is that with Keontae George out with this ankle sprain, even honestly, even if Markkanen, and we know that Jaren is out for the year now, if Lowry was available, they're really low on true creation. And so Isaiah Collier, like, they were negative in his minutes, but they were just so much worse when he was off the floor. And I thought
I mean, he must have been so exhausted from playing 48 minutes in those back-to-back games right before the break that there's no way. I guess the medical staff intervened finally, thank God, and he can only play 24 minutes. And then it's Blake Hinson playing some point guard for you. Let's
he hit some
see if
shots.
Bryce
Nate, but yeah.
Sensabaugh. Let's see if Bryce Sensabaugh can run 6 minutes and 49 seconds. A point guard, Conchar, Vince Williams Jr. getting in spot duty. Kevin Love, obviously, oh man, he must have been on a 5 minute and 14-second minute. So it sure had nothing to do with the fact that he was +5 in playing power forward next to Filipowski at the start of the second quarter. You got to get him out of the game. He can't possibly go back in again. Will Hardy realized that he wasn't giving him the best chance to win out there. What a fucking farce of a game this was.
And so I think it was very conspicuous that in this one, the way that Will Hardy used Isaiah Collier. So Collier, and he did this to his credit in both halves, but Collier, he played the beginning and end of each half. So he played the beginning of the first quarter, and then like says the beginning of the third, and then he played the end of the fourth quarter. But the stretch where the Jazz lost this game successfully was the middle of the third to the beginning of the fourth. And so he brought back the starters when the game was basically over to be like, see, I still played them. It was kind of genius in a specific way. But then the other reason that hurt the Jazz was that even though they were both starters, their minutes were somewhat separated, was that you're like, oh, you need somebody to generate shots, and need somebody to take shots. And I don't think this will affect his long-term development, but I saw a lot more Rutgers Ace Bailey in this one than I wanted to, where he's just like taking some bad shots because somebody had to.
That's what Will Hardy wanted to see, though.
It's definitely what the front office wanted to see, because that helped them lose the game. 8 and 19 from the field, and there is some, like, of course we'll have lots of time to do a full Ace Bailey breakdown. But on the season, so curiosity, because I'm like, man, his catch and shoot three, it looks bad, and it's not going in this game. Ace Bailey's taken 169 catch and shoot threes. He's made 30% of those. He's taken 45 pull-up threes, and he's made 47% of those, which is just a bizarre split. We'll see where that goes moving forward. But like, Bailey just he took some bad shots, and I would say some selfish shots, but it's just kind of like, who else is going to do something here? Filipowski, I thought he looked good offensively when he was out there. But yeah, it was a farce of a game, but at least it was even and kind of competitive. So that part of it made it more fun. And I got to evaluate some of these players that we don't always get the chance. And like, one other guy to mention, we brought Jemai Meshack. He was really disruptive defensively. And like, yeah, you could say the Grizzlies didn't want to win this game, but he was able to really put some pressure. And going back to, that was a part of the appeal for Meshack. He was on these really dangerous defensively Tennessee teams, and Meshack, he channeled some of that for some of the best moments for the Grizzlies in their win.
Yeah, he and Javon Small combined for 6 steals. Grizz had 15, 24 Jazz turnovers, lost them. This one, let's move on now, and we're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves. A little bit more of a truncated section here, but we'll have plenty more time to discuss them later. What do you have to say about the Wolves stats here?
Minnesota on the season, after a pretty big loss to the Sixers on Sunday. They're 35-23, just over 510-9 in their last 19, but still clearly positive net rating. Plus 5.3 is seventh, sixth on offense, eighth on defense, and BPI projects them to be the 5 seed and fully expects them to make the playoffs 98%.
Yeah, so Ayo Dosunmu, of course, has been their big trade deadline addition. What stands out for you as far as how he's been used in Chicago vis-a-vis Minnesota?
He did a lot more initiation with the Chicago Bulls. So he had 136 possessions, 23% of the time, like of his possessions as a pick and roll ball handler with the Bulls. That 23% is currently below 7% with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so he has the classic tenets of a low usage player. He's almost a majority of his touches are in transition, and then most of the other ones are spotting up. And so that means he's not doing a lot with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, I think that's stood out to me as well, where you would say, what are the two things that he's best at? Would be making open spot ups, but then also attacking hard in transition. And that's been a big part of what he's done so far with the Wolves, where he's getting 43% of his plays in transition, 36% of his spot ups. So it's basically 80% of his plays are not self-initiated. I mean, for a guard, that's a pretty crazy number. Yeah, only 3 pick and roll plays, 4 handoffs, and 2 isolations so far. That is pretty darn low. And then if you want to look at the top line numbers for him, his usage was actually above average, 21% in Chicago. That's now down to 17%. And he was incredibly efficient there too. 64% true shooting, 58% right now. Again, we're very early on there, but he also was someone who initiated more this year, made some passes. Like, he just hasn't been asked to do that at all in Minnesota for a team, obviously, that has far more initiators than him. And he's jumping into this group midstream. I would like to see him maybe interacting more with Naz Reid on the second unit. Reid was out in their loss to Philly today with shoulder soreness. Rudy Gobert was suspended due to flagrant foul points that he appealed and did not win. And the Julius Randle at center, Joan Beranger, who didn't even get to start in the second half because they were getting lit up so badly. Those guys were not able to hold it down against Philly. But I would like to see Naz Reid, who Naz Reid doesn't do like as much pick and roll or pick and pop stuff. They'll run like some shooting sets for him. Obviously, you can spot up in the corners or attack in transition. But I think those two guys working together could look really good. Nikola Vucevic, Jalen Smith, of course, were the centers in Chicago that Dosunmu largely played with. And because he's just such a strong driver going to his right hand, a pick and pop center is the perfect guy to play with, particularly if you're getting in a transition with that. So I would like to see him get the ball a little bit more and maybe get a few more chances to initiate on that second unit than he's had so far.
And I think part of this story might also be Chris Finch and Ayo Dosunmu just kind of learning each other, getting in. Joining a team midstream is always harder, and so maybe you just kind of need to see exactly what he can do, learn the sets, learn what to try to do. And so I'm, even though the trade deadline is later in the year, like it's more around the 2/3 mark than the halfway mark, there still is enough time because Minnesota's a team with playoff expectations to figure this stuff out before it really, really matters.
Yeah, but they got blown out today by Philly, 135-108. And yeah, they had to play some Jaden McDaniels at center. That didn't really work out very well either. Dosunmu still came off the bench, played 28 minutes. And so he's playing some with DiVincenzo. That could be an interesting pairing on the second unit as well, which hopefully those two guys together could add up to a point guard potentially. So that's just, I think Chris Finch, he's definitely a different type of player than Nickeil Alexander-Walker on both ends, and Finch is going to have to find a way to use him. Sometimes he's going to close for DiVincenzo. I think he's a little bit better defensively than DiVincenzo, better driver, but also not the same shooter that he is. Where are we going next here?
New Orleans.
Sorry. The Pelicans are 16-42. That's somewhat robust 7-11 since we last checked in on them. Their negative 5.5 net rating is actually not that bad relative to their record. That's 25th in the association. They are 25th on offense, 26th on defense, and they project for only the 13th worst team in the Western Conference, 26-56. They will not be making the playoffs. And we thought perhaps, although our hopes were dashed relatively early before the trade deadline, that you might be doing one of these. Hey, what is this trade partner getting in Trey Murphy III here in his age 25 season? Of course, remember last year he was felled by shoulder surgery. He was doubtful for a game over the weekend. I don't think he's played yet since he had this latest shoulder issue. But hopefully there's nothing permanent there. It is the same shoulder that he had the surgery on. But what have we seen from Trey Murphy III so far this season?
I wanted to wait because we'll do breakdowns of Fears and Queen later on the season. Want to build out the sample a little bit with them. And so what I wanted to kind of think about with Trey Murphy is it's been a lost year for the Pelicans. Is are we seeing anything different? And it's remarkable how similar the top line numbers are to themselves. But the answer is yes, and I'll get into that. But so Trey Murphy, he's played almost he's 1 minute shy of how many total minutes he played last year. 1854, 1853. His 3-point attempt rate, basically the same. 2-point attempt rate is exactly the same. Free throw attempt rate's a little bit down, but not that different. He's making more of his threes, but that's getting back to where he was. Career 38% 3-point shooter. Shooting that this year was 36% last year. And encouragingly, doing better from two, which was something that was another way that Trey Murphy was worse last year than he has been overall in his career. Taking more twos now, as he did last year, but making 59% of them. And so that means that Trey Murphy's his true shooting percentage has jumped from 60 to 62. That's very good. And I think what I found really fascinating is I'm like, okay, because one of the things that I fixated on early in the year was that changing from Willie Green to James Borrego, it's a more active offense, and that really works for Trey Murphy. It does not work as well for Herb Jones, which I've talked about previously, but getting a little bit more in the way of handoffs, but especially in terms of cuts. Trey Murphy he's doing more there. That's going really well. And even with some of their limited spacing lineups, he's just an intuitive cutter, knows what to do, knows where to be. And because you have to respect him from three, like there's some windows there that there wouldn't be available before. The other huge thing that's different for Trey Murphy, and I want to see the overall sample here, but it is extremely encouraging, and you see it. I did some film too, is that last year, Trey Murphy's contested finishing 52%, 52.2 if we're getting specific. That is 64% this year. So that's fabulous. That's that's growth. And, even though Trey Murphy wasn't like a rail thin guy, it is something that we see players improve on. And so if that can, even though he's not taking the most shots around the basket, just getting better at the ones that you take that are hard is really important. So I thought that all of that was good. And then what I got really into, and this is actually what I watched the film on, is that the other big difference between Trey Murphy statistically this year and last year is that he's doing a lot more with the ball in his hands this year. Last year, he had 39 possession, or sorry, he had 156 possessions as the pick and roll ball handler. He already has more than that this year. And this is, we talked about he's played about the same number of minutes. And I was like, why is he doing it that much? Like, that's a little bit weird. And some of that is just...
So let me give a little background on this, actually. 2 years ago, he was a little bit of a darling because his pick and roll numbers were awesome. He had like 60 possessions. It was like 1.125 points per play in pick and roll. And so everyone's like, oh, wow, watch out for him. Like, he could be taking the next step here. Maybe this is this next wing that's going to really evolve into a primary creator. These guys develop late. And I watched it. I was like, no, I don't see this from him at all. Like, there's not really much shiftiness there. Maybe he can bomb a three off the dribble on the pick and roll, but he's not really a 1 foot leaper. He doesn't have the handle to get in and snake the pick and roll, and not to mention like making a bunch of reads as a passer. And then sure enough, last year, again, somewhat of a lost year given how fucked their whole team was. He was down in the 0. 0.7 points per play range. And so that kind of sets the stage for this year, which you're about to talk about now.
And so Trey Murphy has run more pick and roll this year than he did last year. It's up to 17% of his possessions. And he's not more efficient individual scoring and kind of with pass. So he's 0.739 points per play as a scorer. And then if you add in passing, it's not really that much better. And some of that is, this Pelicans team is limited from a shooting perspective. And like, so that it's 0.881 if you include passes. And if you want to get a sense of kind of how much that is, now I'm just going to switch kind of numbers here to Synergy's tracking leaderboard. Trey Murphy has run the 50th most pick and rolls in the NBA, ahead of guys like Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who should be doing that a lot more than Trey Murphy. And when you watch it, and it's the same thing when you look at Trey Murphy's spot up numbers. So spot ups, you get into it in the same situation, but you can do two primary things for it. You can shoot the shot or you can drive. When Trey Murphy just shoots the shot, almost 1.4 points per play. And he's, ridiculous.
I mean, he's taken them from really deep out to, quick release. He's sped that up. He doesn't get a ton of air on his shot. It's more of a set shot, but he gets it off. He's got great base on those shots. Like it's a massive weapon for him.
And then when he drives, it's just about a point per possession, which is not fantastic. I mean, those you can drive in the teeth. Sometimes those can be efficient. Sometimes not. Depends on who you're facing. And so what I wanted to watch for him, kind of in line with what you talked about before, is I wanted to watch some of this pick and roll film and see if I was missing something. See if my theory was correct or if it wasn't. And there were a few little things, like the one time, like he clearly beat the defender. He was being defended by Ja Morant, which is like, yeah, okay, anybody can beat Ja Morant. But the best clips of the pick and roll film were just Trey Murphy shooting with his feet set, which is not the point of running a pick and roll. Like that's not what he's trying to do. And
yeah, here's a quick stat on that, right? Out of high pick and roll on plays where he went to the basket rather than shooting, although his dribble jumpers are awful too out of high pick and roll, but he's 10 out of 27 on plays where he attacked the basket out of pick and roll from up top.
And you see that in the film. I mean, there are some where you not a lot to be excited about in terms of Trey Murphy's handle or his passing, and a lot of what they're running, it's like you could say, okay, there are ways with the Pelicans. You have Zion Williamson, you have Makovich, you have Derek Queen. Like you could get into some interesting stuff, though. I'll get into my beef with this. Instead, a lot of it is just like small stuff, and Trey Murphy doesn't have the juice to beat a small switch. And they don't really have the smalls to beat the other side of it either. And so what I just started getting progressively madder about was, why are they doing so much on the Pelicans? Because on most teams you'd be like, okay, wouldn't be a fair criticism. But you're playing with these teammates. Why are they doing so much with Trey as the ball handler and so little with him as the screener? And even if it's like a fake screen or something else, like is there something really wrong in his pick and pop numbers? Like, I mean, he's not a great screener, but like something in that. No, as Synergy tracks it, Trey Murphy is 9 of 13 on pick and pops. So like, what are we even doing here? You could do it with a small, you could do it with a big. They have bigs who can actually handle. Like it's sort of an inversion, but it would create some, because one of the things that I was criticizing about the small stuff with Trey Murphy is he can't beat small guys on a switch. But part of the reason you could do it with Trey Murphy and a big is that either he could beat a bigger guy because he has a quickness advantage, or the team doesn't want to switch because it's like Zion Williamson or somebody else, and then you generate something for the ball handler, or you generate something when they're refusing to switch. And so it's just like, it's a really bizarre process decision for a team that's trying to win games. And like, this isn't a circumstance where, okay, first of all, they don't have their own pick, but where, okay, you're having him explore the studio space, you're really trying to get better. Like they did this last year and it didn't work. They could be doing other things, be giving those reps to other guys, and I would think would have a better chances. And so it's wild. He's a very efficient player, 62% true shooting. It would be way higher if they took out this thing that he shouldn't be doing.
No, I think that's true. Now they don't have a ton of other initiators at this point in time. Jordan Poole has been benched. The other thing I would say too is they do run him off some split cuts with Queen up top, and that's how he gets a lot of these backdoor alley oops. He's been devastating as a cutter, as you noted, or he can his shooting can be something that they could work with. I think the problem with putting him in the main action as the screener, although that hasn't stopped them as with him with the ball, is they have no other guys who can shoot. And I mean, you've got Herb Jones shooting 30%. Queen is a terrible shooter. Fears a terrible shooter. Like their second best shooter is probably Sadiq Bey, and so that's it's not particularly encouraging. So I think that's part of it. Is just he's the only guy that they can run any kind of an off-ball action for. And I mean, I think a lot of it just goes with the roster construction of this team where they just don't have. And I think also a lot of times the only way to get him a shot, because everyone's glued to him, they don't have anyone else that they're worried about helping off of, is to give him the ball. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly his off the dribble 3-point shooting has not been great. And if you look overall at his efficiency, 44.2% on self-created stuff, that's in the 25th percentile. But he's absolutely off the charts as anything that his teammates set up for him. It's just those are hard to come by because he's the only guy in the team that they're just not going to leave. So I do sympathize with Borrego's circumstance right now, because this is not the most versatile roster from a shooting perspective. Anything else on these guys?
No, I think we could go somewhere else.
Okay, and let's make that somewhere else the LA Clippers.
The Clippers are now 27-29. They lost at home just by 2 to the Orlando Magic on Sunday. They're 12-6 in their last 18. Negative net rating, negative 0.9, but that's a lot better than it was. 12th on offense, 20th on defense, and BPI projects them to be the 9 seed, 42-40, and give them a better than 50% chance of making the playoffs, despite predicting they'd be the 9 seed.
Yeah, Kawhi Leonard's been dealing with the lingering ankle injury, left with about 2 minutes remaining in the game against the Lakers. He was asked about it today because he actually played in their loss to the Magic. Ben Mathurin had a chance to either tie or win the game down the end, wasn't able to get it done. But Kawhi said, I only had 2 minutes left in the game to play anyway. It's been a lingering injury. The medical staff said if it didn't loosen up, just let them know. I told them I'd rather play the minutes that I played tonight against the Magic rather than try to do the last 2 minutes against the Lakers. So he said he went to the back, made sure everything was right, got treatment, and he said it felt all right tonight, but he's battling through it still. Ben Mathurin has had some pretty huge game. He was awesome against the Lakers. The thing that stood out to me the most is that he's given them at least some kind of a transition impetus that they just haven't had. If you look at his play types, he's already got 21 plays coming into tonight as a transition player and 1.4 points per play there. Had a couple of pick sixes in their last game before the Magic game as well. And the other thing is that they have been giving him the ball even more as a pick and roll ball handler. That actually statistically was not terrible in Indiana, where he was over a point per play there, which was 87th percentile. That's lower with the Clippers so far, but he's really the only other guy in this team who can dribble right now, unless you want to put Jordan Miller in that category, perhaps. But certainly I think Mathurin has a chance to stick here. I mean, we haven't talked about this much, Danny, but the Clippers' finances going forward, if they were to retain Mathurin at the type of salary that he would hope to be getting, what does that look like? How does that affect some of their future planning to add him into this group? Because they could also potentially be a cap space team this offseason, or of course, certainly in 27 when they have essentially nothing on the books other than Darius Garland.
I think you kind of nailed it towards the end there. I mean, Darius Garland and Isaiah Jackson are the only 2 Clippers that have guaranteed money for 27-28. So you could add him in and still do a lot of different things. And the other benefit of restricted free agency for a non-premium player is that generally like that'll squeeze things a little bit, so you could wait it out, and just if another team makes a reckless offer, then you can roll with it. But broadly speaking, if they can get Mathurin on a contract that they are comfortable with, that can fit within their structure. It won't prevent them from doing just about anything. And unless things go very poorly in the 26-27 season, if you absolutely needed that last 15, 18 million, whatever it's going to be, in space, you could make that happen. Like that's never been the sticking point in the modern NBA for preventing it. If you get 2 stars or something else and people want to go there, like you can do that. You can make it work. So like I think that they're in a pretty good spot. And you mentioned the potential cap space for this year. They could go that route if they really wanted to, but it, especially when you consider the idea that most of the scenarios where they used real cap space to make an impact in the summer of 26 would compromise 27, which seems like the bigger priority. So you could move in a different direction. They have all these guys on team options, so they could theoretically like they can finagle that depending on how they want to do it. Some of them, like Bogdanovich, they'll probably just decline anyway. But there are some where they can kind of see where things are, or if they maybe there'd be something involving matching salary, and it's easier to do something with matching salary for guys that are on expiring deals than things moving forward. So if they want to retain Mathurin, they absolutely can, and I don't think it'll compromise anything unless he gets a ludicrous offer, and then he probably wouldn't match it in the first place.
Yeah, I imagine that they will probably just hold on to him because they would have to cut quite a bit to create that 34 million in cap space. That would mean no Bogdanovich team option, which he's probably not trending towards getting 16 million next year. They probably opt him out of that, but Brook Lopez has been pretty useful for them, particularly given some of their shooting limitations, which we'll talk about in a second. But he's got a $9.2 million team option for next year. And then Mathurin is a quick cap mechanics here. I think it was in the 27 CBA, or sorry, 2017 CBA, that they changed the cap holds for first round picks. And then also they bumped up those salaries. So Mathurin making 9.2 this year in the 4th year of his rookie scale deal. Because he's making less than the estimated average player salary, his cap hold for next year as the number 6 overall pick is 300% of what he's making. So that's over $27 million for a cap hold for him. This isn't one of those cases where, say, like Walker Kessler, who was picked in the 20s, his cap hold's only 14 million. So the Jazz at one point were going to be able to use cap space and then re-sign him to a higher number. Not really an option here with Mathurin. I wouldn't imagine he would have a starting salary of 27 million. But I think, what is he going to agree to? Something in the high teens maybe would probably be the lowest you would guess. So it seems pretty unlikely that the Clippers would use 34 million in cap space. Now, maybe if there were a free agent that really wanted to go there that they coveted, they could go that route. But I think it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen with Mathurin, because they don't have any sort of a shooting guard prospect in the pipeline, and they got to find a way to get up more threes. Now, I think Garland will really help with that because he's someone who can shoot the three off the dribble. Of course, they had that in James Harden, but he is now dearly departed. But some of the guys that they're playing right now, I mean, they started Chris Dunn, they started Kobe Sanders, and they started Derrick Jones Jr. In their last game before this Magic game. Let's see who they started in this one. Yeah, same group there as well. So between Brook Lopez, they still got Mathurin coming off the bench. They really just don't have any kind of three-point shooters at all around Kawhi and Brook Lopez, and they're going to defend. But and then Nique Batum is going to play, but he's not going to play more than 15 minutes. And even Jordan Miller, who's essentially a shooting guard, took 0 3-pointers today in 23 minutes. So the Clippers have to find a way to get more three-point shooting in this roster. Garland will help with that. I don't love Mathurin in that role. I think he's really more of a 6-man guy, and they need, I guess they'll have Bradley Beal next year if he hops into the player option, which he probably will. But he is not really that kind of bomber type of shooting guard. They try to run those guys away, of course. So They still have a lot of, I mean, I think Darius Garland, Kawhi, Brook Lopez get one more center in maybe, and then Mathurin coming off the bench. Like those are all good guys in those slots, but then just having something other than just guys who are going to either defend or try to score on their own, not that efficiently. Like they're a long way away from getting back to the type of balanced team that they had last year when they really pushed the Nuggets.
Recently extended Lawrence Frank has a very challenging set of decisions in front of him because you have Kawhi Leonard and, if assuming they keep him in the last year of his contract, he's playing, I mean, at this otherworldly level recently. And so you could actually build a viable competitive team, but how much do you throw into that in terms of money and all that, and what do you potentially put on the table for 27, 28 versus trying to like kind of keep it open and everything else. So like I don't know exactly what they're going to do, but to me Mathurin doesn't conflict too much with those plans now that they've already made the other moves, getting rid of Harden, getting rid of Zubats, everything else.
Let's move cross town here to the Lakers.
The Lakers had a pretty dispiriting loss to the Boston Celtics, unveiled the Pat Riley statue, and then got waxed by their longtime rival. They're still 34-22, 11-9 in their last 20, but a below water net rating. They're 12 games over 500, but have a negative net rating, negative 0.5, 11th on offense, 22nd on defense. BPI projects them to win 47 games, which would be the 6th seed in the West, and still thinks they're going to make the playoffs almost all the time, 93%.
Yeah, another interesting thing, of course, about the Lakers, and they continued. Dan noted this stat for them a bit ago. I don't know if it's still the case, but they had essentially the worst net rating in losses in league history about a month ago, and their 20-point or so loss to Boston didn't do much to improve matters there, but they still are 34-22, and they are 14-3 in clutch games. They have won 3.2 more clutch games than expected. So that's actually kind of interesting. I mean, they would still be 11. We would have expected them based on where they were when they entered the clutch to still be 11-6. Also pretty interesting that they are 4-11 against teams on pace to win more than 50 games, but 17-1 against teams on pace to win 35 games or fewer. And there will be more of those teams than ever entering that discussion. So, but they've been a very solid clutch team. I noticed, and this has been the case for a while, and I think I first became kind of aware of this trend with Luka back in that series in 2021 against the Clippers, that classic series where they were up 2-0 and then 3-2 and lost the last two. That Luka, he seemed like he almost would punch himself out in the first half and then just not have anything at the end of games. So if you look at his quarter by quarter usage and efficiency, it basically goes down every quarter. I think this is some fascinating stuff here. Let's go through it on first through fourth quarter. Luka Doncic, just usage and his true shooting and what that decline is on the quarter by quarter basis.
So we can start with the positive. We'll start with the first quarter. And so in first quarters this season, Luka Doncic has 64% true shooting on 42% usage. And that's just preposterous. And the Lakers have a 120.8 offensive rating when he's on the floor in first quarters.
Yeah, I mean that is just, it's very interesting because generally what you'll see, we'll go through it here. The second quarter, and Luka will usually play nearly the entire first quarter. Then going into the second quarter, goes down to 36% usage, but still 63.5% true shooting. So first halves, he's been absolutely unstoppable. Then getting into the third quarter, what about that?
Third quarter, Luka, that usage rate drops again to 35.3, true shooting of 58.6, so about 59. And then that Lakers offensive rating is a 115.9. So that's about 5 points per 100 possessions worse than the first quarters.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then fourth quarters are even more interesting because normally that's when it's really winning time, and you'll see some of the crazy numbers of guys and fourth quarter is in the clutch, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He really ramps it up. You got guys high 30s into the 40s, whereas Luka has by far his lowest usage percentage in the fourth quarter, 31.1%, which, this is a guy who has basically been one of the biggest usage hogs in NBA history. Noteworthy that Luka, Austin Reeves, and LeBron haven't played in all the games together, so that does skew this. But Reeves is at 30% usage in the fourth, and LeBron is also at 30%. So it's much more egalitarian in those fourth quarters, and Luka only 56% true shooting. Now, if you get into the clutch, Luka's numbers are way better in terms of his efficiency. He's at 64% true shooting in the clutch. So it's a little bit different than in fourth quarters, although there have been a lot of games where the Lakers are within 10 and then just start getting blown out in the fourth quarter. And, those numbers do count as well. And so it's just kind of odd to me and that's always been the case with Luka, where most guys of his ilk are like, oh, I'm going to start off getting my teammates involved. And it's also not like his passing is just like unbelievable in these fourth quarters relative to the other quarters either. So it's just something to keep an eye on. It's really been a pattern for him that he comes out ultra aggressive. Now, there have been classic moments where he's absolutely killed teams, right? You go back to game 7 in 2022 against the Suns, or game 5 in 2024 against the Wolves, where he just puts teams completely out of the game in the first quarter or the first half. And it's not even close to anymore. But that's, especially when you consider that he's someone who's dealt with conditioning issues. Maybe he just knows that he's going to get tired by the end of the game, so he might as well shoot as many times as he can early on. But it's just a very odd pattern to me.
I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more curiosity with the Lakers on this front.
Yeah.
So when you narrow it down to clutch, and you've talked about how Luka, LeBron, and Austin Reeves haven't all been available at the same time and all this type of stuff. In 13 clutch games with Luka Doncic available, and then there have been 14 with LeBron available, both of those, the Lakers' offensive rating in that narrow sample is over a 130. With Austin Reeves, it's a 107.8. And Reeves himself, 56% true shooting on 28 usage. So like LeBron and Luka are brutally efficient. The team has been brutally efficient in clutch games when they've been on the floor. I don't think there's anything to that. As I always caution, when you narrow the sample too small, it gets into that. But that is interesting.
It was an unfortunate Lakers loss to, I shouldn't say unfortunate, but it was a repetitive Lakers lost to the Celtics. I mentioned their record against teams on pace to win 50 plus. The Celtics are certainly that at this point in time. But those young wings for the Celtics, I thought, really caused a lot of problems for LA. And there are just a lot of plays where the likes of Baylor Shireman or Ugo Gonzalez or Jordan Walsh or even someone like Peyton Pritchard would just run to the dotted line and jump up among 3 Lakers and tip out an offensive rebound. And the overall offensive rebounding for Boston wasn't unbelievable in this game, but there definitely was an out-hustling element. Jackson Hayes got hurt after only 5 minutes, so they didn't have a center to play in the second half. They didn't go to Maxi Kleber until the game was completely out of reach. So they tried to go with, the Jared Vanderbilt at center, or LeBron or Hachimura. They went to that group as the game was kind of slipping away when Nikola Vucevic was at center for the Celtics late third, early fourth. They weren't really able to take advantage of him. And so I think you don't expect the Lakers to be able to stop the Boston Celtics. Like, they are a very good offensive team. And the defense actually, I didn't think was so bad, right? Within what their capabilities are. They kept them off the offensive glass reasonably well, forced actually more turnovers than Boston will normally have, or that the Lakers will normally force for that matter. They got lit up totally by Peyton Pritchard, 30 points on 10 of 14 for him, 6 of 9 from 3. A couple of those came off big offensive rebounds that were tipped out by some of the wings, and they didn't have anyone to guard Peyton Pritchard. Like, they have one guy on this team that you would trust to guard Peyton Pritchard, which is Marcus Smart, and he was being used on some other guys and also couldn't hit a shot. But it just comes back to the Laker offense. 89 points on 96 possessions in this game. And we talked at the outset that they're not a top 5 offense. They're not even close to being a top 5 offense. And you could kind of see there are a number of reasons why in this game. I mean, number one, like Luka Doncic was guarded pretty much just fine by Bill Sharman. He was 5 of 15 from 2. He struggled to score over the likes of Nique Clifford at the rim. And Austin Reeves, we didn't really hear from him much in this one. He drew some fouls. Other than drawing a lot of kind of BS fouls, including someone breathed on me as I was getting a defensive rebound, I'm going to fall down type of fouls. He was ineffective. LeBron, again, just wasn't, like, he was actually being left open from 3 quite a bit as well. And then when they tried to go small, Marcus Smart was 0 of 5 from 3. They tried to, Boston put their center on Smart, including Vucevic. Smart, they need him desperately for defense, but he missed 2 pick and pop threes, was 0 of 7 from the field. So then JJ Redick went to Luke Kennard, and that obviously is not a particularly sustainable strategy against a team like Boston with their good ball handlers. And so I just, again, 31 3-point attempts, made 29% of them. Luka was 4 of 7 from 3, but 5 of 15 from 2, as I mentioned. There just was not, you didn't feel this, and I haven't really felt this all season. I'm just like, oh man, except when they played the Jazz, of like, yeah, this Lakers offense is just unstoppable. And is it the individual guys? Is it the lack of having like a really good role man? Like Ayton was completely a non-entity in this one, negative 15, 2 of 6 from the field. Is it the lack of shooting? Is it the inability of Reeves, Doncic, and James to play off of each other? It just has not added up to what you would think would be like, yeah, all right, you want to say they can't stop anybody? Sure, they shouldn't be able to stop anybody with this personnel, but they really have to find a way to be inevitable offensively. They just have not been that this season.
And one of the concerns that I think it's harder to turn around, there are some theoretical things, is that, we've talked about this with a few other teams over this pod and others. The Lakers are bottom 10 in transition frequency. And this part can bounce back, but they're also not much better than bottom 10 in terms of effectiveness on the transition that they do get. And so the Lakers, they're third in half-court points per play this year, 102.8 per cleaning the glass. But they're not getting it in the other ways. They're not doing any damage on the offensive glass. They're not doing any damage in transition. Now, a Luka Doncic team, that is going to be a structural weakness, but maybe you can do that through somebody else. But it's something that is concerning because the Lakers have already devoted so much of their treasure to offense that you still need those things to be a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, they have one guy in this team, I would say, who plays hard. That's Marcus Smart. Reeves will kind of stick his nose in there and like draw some fouls or maybe some charges here and there, but he doesn't really have the athleticism to affect the game in that way. All right, so we got 3 teams left here? We got to do the Kings, Spurs, and Dallas. Was that right? Or am I missing anybody?
Yeah, no, that's correct. As far as
okay,
yeah.
Well, let's get to San Antonio then. What are their stats?
The Spurs are 40-16. That is fantastic. 13-5 in their last 18. They are 4th in net rating, plus 7.1, 5th on offense, 3rd on defense, and they're projected to be the 2 seed in the Western Conference, 56 wins. This strong stretch when some of the other teams have faltered due to availability and just quality play. That's really important, and they are going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, they've got, a 4 or 5 game lead now on Denver, who's not playing particularly well. I mean, we probably haven't been talking enough about Victor Wembanyama's offense. There are always going to be issues with him in terms of him exploring the studio space versus doing what's the best for him and his team in that particular moment. I think that, though, 62% true shooting on 32 usage is pretty damn good.
It's incredibly impressive.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and I think one of the things that is going to be fascinating, he's at 44% on long twos right now, which is still probably not great offense, but teams teams do seem to respect that shot, right? They are trying to front him in the post. They're trying to not let him get a catch closer to the basket. Even if he's not able to turn those isolation plays into more than a long two, it does seem like teams are worried about letting him get that against, like a 6'7" guy that he's got basically a foot on and shooting right over him. So he's taking 7 per 100 possessions there, those long twos. That's a pretty high rate. Dylan Harper wanted to talk about his jump shooting. It's been miserable from 3-point range, like absolutely terrible. His 3-point shot quality, what you would expect a league average shooter to make based on when those shots are coming in the clock, how open they are, where they are taken from. We would expect him to be shooting 37.5%. So it's not like he's taking all these tough off the dribble attempts. He is currently shooting 25.9% on three. So he's shooting almost 12% worse than would be expected. Moreover, he is at 13% on self-created threes. And if you're eventually expecting him to be a dynamo pick and roll player, like he's going to need to have at least some threat of making that shot. That is just a miserable number. 29.2% on team created shots. Now he's not passing him up, I will say at least, but for a guy where 78% of his threes are uncontested, this is a miserable shooting performance. I was concerned about his jump shot, and maybe less so from 3 than I was from 2. Interestingly, that has been quite the opposite. He's actually at 49% on long twos. So that's something where if he is going to be more of a pick and roll operator, having that in his bag, maybe that will end up being enough. And his contested finishing, I mean, that's the thing that's always stood out to him. He's one of my favorite guys to watch finish at the basket in the league. He's a 55% 2-point shooter, and buoyed in part again by that 49% on long twos. And as a contested finisher inside of 10 feet, he's already well above league average for a rookie guard. That is outstanding. Last thing I wanted to talk about for these guys was their new starting lineup. They have relegated Harrison Barnes now to the bench. And so they're starting De'Aaron Fox, Steph Castle, Julian Champagnie, Devin Vassell, and Victor Wembanyama. So I guess you're going to say Champagnie he's the tallest. I think he's the 4 there. Now this is with Steph Castle. He's not a great shooter. The other guys can shoot. Champagnie and Vassell are definitely both better shooters than Harrison Barnes. What do you think just of the concept of that starting lineup change?
I think that there are certain teams where it could work, where having a much smaller 3-4 combination doesn't kill you. And for example, they face the Sacramento Kings, who we'll talk about very shortly. They don't have the types of players that are going to exploit those sorts of deficiencies. But there will be other teams, ideally a healthy Nuggets, and the Oklahoma City Thunder often start to bigs, where you might not be able to do it. But we'll need to build out the sample. That's going to be so interesting is like, Wembanyama is a defense by himself, but the defensive rebounding and some of the other stuff. But offensively, sure, I think it can work. And when you're dealing with a limited shooting guard, then having, we'll see where Vassell's numbers end up over the whole year. But like Champagnie, Vassell, Fox, that's a good, and Wembanyama, of course, that's a nice complementary group to work at some of Castle's weaknesses.
Yeah, looking at some of the numbers, the shooting is not unsustainable for them, but they have a 127 offensive rating with that group and 170 possessions. 127 obviously it is very good, and you'd expect that to be a great offensive group with the shooting that they have and around Wemby. I mean, that's something that I've encouraged. Part of the reason I didn't love the Steph Castle fit there was I wanted more shooting around Wembanyama, but if everyone else is a plus shooter, including Wembanyama himself, you should be in pretty good shape. Defensively, they're pretty much about league average. Big problem for them is there are 2. One is they are forcing almost no turnovers whatsoever. Now, Harrison Barnes famously is not going to solve that really. That's actually a little disappointing. Vassell, Castle, Fox, those guys should be able to be a little bit better as Sharks than that. They've been playing Wembanyama in a very conservative drop most of the time, which is great in terms of the opponent's shots like distribution. But then they're also fouling a ton with those groups as well. But opponents can't make a shot against them in part due to just having Wembanyama out there. So that's a fascinating group. I mean, obviously they could go Keldon Johnson in that spot at times. I'm not sure if Harper fits in there either. The fit with those shooting numbers between he and Castle is a pretty rough one. I don't think we're going to see him closing very many games either. The other reason I might not like it, and again, this is something I'll have to dig into more and probably won't even come up much until the playoffs. But I've encouraged teams to maybe think about putting their center on Steph Castle due to his lack of shooting. Now, they haven't wanted to do that because then you have Victor Wembanyama setting a screen for Steph Castle. He's probably being guarded by the power forward. You probably have to switch that. Now the center's on Wembanyama. You don't want to be in that circumstance. That screen's probably going to be set pretty low on the floor. Wembanyama could slip out of there, maybe get an alley-oop. Castle's great at throwing that. So I don't know that that's necessarily a panacea if they're going to give Castle the ball when he's off the ball. I think it could work pretty well. But since Champagny and Vassell are both better shooters probably than Barnes, teams were trying to stash their center on Barnes. Now they might be like, maybe we should stash our center on Castle instead. But I think part of the reason why Mitch Johnson has gone to this approach is to try to get the center onto Wembanyama more. And I think Wembanyama can really hurt that quite a bit. So it's an interesting concept. Again, Harrison Barnes, they might need him more for post defense if they have a matchup they want to keep Wembanyama out of so he doesn't get in foul trouble. I think it's really, hopefully even in the playoffs, it'll be more of a matchup based thing for Miss Johnson. But I like the idea of just saying, we're just going to really put a ton of shooting around Wembanyama, and that's been powerful so far. We'll see whether that continues.
So I think we can. It's going to be really interesting to see how it goes. We keep getting another 2 months. We'll see how much Mitch Johnson leans on this lineup. We'll get a lot of it. And the Spurs, I was just looking at this the other day. They have some potentially big games late in the regular season, so we could get some tests. We'll see what seeding is set by that point. There could be some, based on what we know. Well, there's one team whose seeding is some version of set, and that's the Sacramento Kings.
Oh boy. Yeah, the Sacramento Kings are 12-46, 4-16 in their last 20 games. They are DFL negative 10.9, 30th in the NBA in net rating, 28th on offense, 29th on defense. A putrid 19-63 is their projection per BPI. They will not be making the playoffs, and the Sacramento curse continuing for DeAndre Hunter, who had to undergo season-ending eye surgery a couple of games into his Sacramento tenure. He had not appeared in a game since the February 6th loss to the Clippers when he got struck in the left eye by Kobe Sanders. So he had left eye iritis, and further evaluations revealed a detached retina. But he had actually practiced before that, which is a little odd. And that's quite fine. Maybe Hunter can be part of what they're doing after this. They wouldn't have wanted him to help them win any games anyway. So he'll be on the shelf. Nique Clifford is going to be largely featured now. He is in his age 23 season, but turned 24 in February. I remember he had this itinerant career through Colorado. 24th pick. The Kings actually went ahead and acquired that one. What do you see from Nique Clifford so far this season?
Well, we're getting a chance to see a lot more of him now. Nique Clifford is averaging 33 minutes a game in February. And the ramp up happened before that. It was late January where it really started. And somebody who intrigued both of us at Summer League, he was not on our draft scout list before and had some real moments. And I think that the film of him, the stats are more negative on this. The film is a little bit mixed. And the thing that I like most about Nique Clifford is his fluidity. I think that he kind of gets into stuff. He's interesting. He makes reasonable decisions. But what's concerning, and he's not getting a lot of help. Like, one of the things when I was watching Nique Clifford's pick and roll film is just how terrible most of the screens that are being set for him are. Like, and that's
Mm.
that's a challenge. And so, for a player, especially one who's not an explosive athlete, you need that to be a little bit better. But he's not beating his guy that much. And so then you kind of, and that can change, but again, he's an older rookie, already has turned 24. Not that that's a death sentence or anything like that. But you see some of those limitations, even though there are things that I like about him in a couple other ways. So one of them is his contested finishing. So far this year, I mean, Nique Clifford overall on twos is converting 45%, but his contested finishing is 44%, which is below the 25th percentile. That's really bad. And it's true that, especially with who's been available, the Kings aren't having a lot of guys who can occupy. And you actually see some strength from Clifford in terms of like moving his guy off, that kind of stuff. But in terms of like finishing over a bigger guy, like a helper or something like that, that stuff looks pretty bad so far. And like the beating his guy stuff is actually in some ways more of a concern because like guys improve at their contested finishing. I just talked about Trey Murphy a little bit ago over the course of their career. But like there's a play where Nique Clifford doesn't beat Marcus Smart, no shame in that, but then he just passes out, good decision, but it's right to a Laker on the far side who wasn't even like really paying attention, it just kind of hit him. And so you have those sorts of plays, but then there are other ones that work better. Like I thought that was really nice. Clifford drive and kick past Jaime Jaquez, where he drives past Jaquez, draws the help, then moves it out to Zach LaVine for a three. So I think that there to me there isn't enough kind of the on ball juice like the 5 alarm fire. Even if you had better surrounding talent, you had Sabonis setting the screens, you had more shooting, you were on a competently coached team. I still, knowing what I know right now, I wouldn't make a big bet on Nique Clifford as an on ball like star, anything like that. And so that puts there's a possibility, but if I had to put odds on it, I'm not going to say he's going to do it. But then that puts more pressure on Clifford's jump shot, and that's actually beyond the finishing. That's the other thing that's concerning. It was interesting because I watched the film before I looked at the stats. I like to do this with a young guy because I want to know what I'm seeing because I might be biased with the stats, and the numbers on it are they're somewhat concerning. So I think that Clifford, he's one of these players who was much better shooting the ball in his later college tenure than he was early, but he also
Yeah.
took a lot more of them. So he was 38% his last year at Colorado State, and he was about that the year before, but he was like not taking many and not making many in the years before that. And so overall, Clifford this year, he's making 32% of only 4.4 per 36 minutes. And so like you want the rate to be higher there, you want the success to be there, and like his jump shot, it just looks a little it's slow, which is a problem. I noticed that his right elbow was out super far, and that might be part of why it's a little bit slow. I think he can tighten up the speed part of it fine, but there are other kind of parts of that. Like one of the other ways that a guy who's like not the best athletically could be like, oh, they have a nasty floater. We've seen some other guys who could do that. Trey, LaMelo at his best moments. I was like, when I watched them, I'm like, oh god, these runners are bad, and the numbers on that are true too. 11 of 35 on runners so far this year. That is overall 12th percentile. And so like with Clifford, I like his game, and like his pushes in transition can be pretty fun, and like he does a lot of the in between stuff. But what intrigued me going back was the idea that like, oh, maybe the jumper is a little bit more there. Late bloomers can be a couple of different things, and so I'm not closing the door. But when I watched the film on him, and I did the film before the stats, I just wasn't seeing a guy who's going to make other teams sweat as much as I wanted.
Yeah, and you just wonder exactly what this player type is. Yeah, I was intrigued by him because it seemed like he could do a little bit of everything, dribble, pass, and shoot in summer league, and also had at least reasonable size. Still more of a 2 than a 3 size wise, but then he could hold up defensively, maybe switch on to some threes a little bit. And the ecosystem in Sacramento has been so awful, and Doug Christie is, I would say, one of the worst coaches that we've seen in the last 10 years. And so you, you're hoping maybe that there's a mulligan aspect to this. He didn't really get much of a chance to play early on. I think they're going to give him the ball more than they have, but they don't really have any shooting on this team. Maybe getting Keegan Murray back will help a little bit. Who knows how much he's even going to play down the end. They haven't had Sabonis. They haven't had like good role men. Yeah, Maxime Reno is okay in that regard, but they're just like, because essentially what he's looking like is you can't point to a single skill that he has right now that's NBA quality, and from a statistical standpoint. And while I do think he has a skill level and a comfort level and a fluidity with the ball, so like you, I'm not willing to give up on him, but it's not encouraging that he's already 24 and that the numbers are this bad. But this will be a chance. I mean, it's going to be silly season down the end here. Maybe he'll get a chance to get more comfortable, get more reps, and a new coach could unlock him. So I do think there are some building blocks there still, but certainly you have to say it's pretty discouraging, especially for those of us who thought he might be somewhat of a revelation in summer league.
And one more discouraging thing, when I was kind of thinking I knew I wanted to do the Kings, is I'm like, I'd really love to do a Devin Carter breakdown. Like, he's only played 300 minutes this year, and like, he's healthy now. He played 6 minutes in their loss to the Spurs.
Yeah, I thought he actually had a few moments in that Cavs game that I saw where they were pretty competitive. But let's get to the Dallas Mavericks to finish things out here.
The Mavericks are 20-36, 6-11 in their last 17 after a devastating win over the Indiana Pacers on Sunday, 134-130.
Yeah. Well, so I think they won 5 straight and then lost 10 straight. They went 1 month without wins. That was finally broken.
And the Mavericks negative 3.6 net rating is 23rd, 26th on offense, 14th on defense, and projected for 31 wins, which would be the 12 seed in the West. They are not making the playoffs.
Yeah, and this actually was a real basketball game. If you look at the guys who played, Dallas won on the road. It was a very fast game, 108 possessions, but Pascal Siakam played 29 minutes and had 30 points and actually closed the game in this one. Andrew Nembhard was back. So Indiana was missing a few guys, but they played some real guys. And then Dallas, for their part, PJ Washington played 36 minutes. Obviously, Cooper Flagg's out with the mid-foot sprain, but they started Chris Middleton at point guard. So they had Middleton, Christie, Naji Marshall, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, and then Clay, Caleb Martin, Brandon Williams, Marvin Bagley, Tyus Jones. All those guys played in this one, came off the bench, and they won. So this was not a like ridiculous tank off of a game necessarily. So Chris Middleton actually had 25 points on 11 of 15. He was excellent in this one. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen with Dallas. I don't think they're as bad as having lost these 10 games in a row necessarily, and they don't have that many total tank commanders on their team. Now, some of the guys that they do have haven't been that great, right? Like Daniel Gafford hasn't been at his level. Jake Fisher reported that Dallas was looking for a first-round pick in trade for Gafford at the deadline, was not able to find one. Now, of course, for a player like Gafford, much depends on what the matching salary is coming back, how long that's going to last. PJ Washington got a lucrative extension that rendered him not trade eligible this season because it was for so much and it was late enough. He's really been struggling on the offensive end. So his shot making is 6.4 percentage points worse than would be expected. He's been horrible on both self and team created plays. He is at 30.7% from 3, which is 5.8 percentage points worse than expected. He's shooting 34.5% on uncontested threes, which in his career, he's right about the league average at 38%. And then this is something that PJ has always kind of struggled with. His contested finishing, 49.8%, 51% on twos for this player type. Not very impressive. On plays that Synergy is categorized as layups, he's at 47%, which is 16th percentile. Now, this is not a group that's had a lot of spacing, but you would hope that it would be a little bit better for him. He's also really struggled in transition where he hasn't shot the 3-ball well. And when they've deigned to give him pick and roll ball handler reps, he's at 0.68 points per play, which is horrendous. Not horrendous though is the floater shooting of one Naji Marshall, which we've talked about before, but these numbers are just absolutely deranged. 71 of 113 on what Synergy characterizes as runners. So that's 63%. And these are hard shots too. You know, we talked about Nikola Jokic and his otherworldly shooting from the upper paint. And some of those Jokic are like, you know, post ups against guys his own size. But then others of those for Jokic are plays where he's getting the ball in the pocket, coming down the lane, and has a pretty open one. Naji Marshall is not getting those at all. These are all self created. And in fact, on all self-created shots, Naji Marshall is shooting 57.1% field goal percentage, which is ridiculous. Inside of 10 feet, he shoots 62.5% when he's contested. And he's even shooting 53% on long twos as well. If you look at the film on that, a lot of it is in transition, but he's also pretty solid on ISOs. And most of that, he's 20 and 35 on ISOs, which is a great number. Most of that is getting to his floater against smaller guys. But if he can just get a little bit of separation or just shoot over guys, it's really money. He's also a dogged individual defender. Doesn't have elite length, but you know he is shooting 30% on threes, which is negative 6 points compared to what you would expect him to be shooting on that shot quality. So he definitely is contributing to their overall lack of shooting, and he's not really even wanting to stand out by the 3-point line. He wants to attack off the dribble, but he's not doing it that often, right? His usage is slightly below 20%. And he's only averaging 3.6 assists per 36. So my question to you is, there's a lot of things that he does well that are interesting, but how do you fit that player in on a team that really has some higher aspirations?
It's hard because Naji Marshall, I mean, this duality where he has 61% true shooting despite not making his threes, and he's been, you know, a career 30% 3-point shooter. It's unfortunate that really hot year with the Pels might be just the only true high watermark for him. So he can do all these things inside, and so like maybe you get into a circumstance where like it's sort of a little bit Steph Castle-y, where like he's your worst shooter, but you have other guys around him. But you obviously
Yeah.
you
I
want
mean, I think
somebody.
the difference there is just that, you know, Steph Castle is, well, probably a better defender than him as well. But then also Steph Castle can really pass, which is kind
Exactly.
of what we're not seeing as much from Naji Marshall. So yeah, I mean, I not to say that that's a terrible comparison, but I do think that's probably the biggest difference is that Naji Marshall can't really play point guard.
Agreed. And so you get into these circumstances. Well, if he's not in kind of involved in the action, well, then other teams can help off of him. And I think that because he's a capable defensive player, you kind of you always want to shoehorn those players in, but it's an uncomfortable fit. I think that's the real answer. And so that's, you know, I think that he could help out a team, but the idea that he's an automatic starter closer when I consider some of his weaknesses is just kind of being set now, that
Yeah.
is a little bit uncomfortable. But I mean, and he's 28 already at this point, so it's not like you don't usually see a guy turn over a new leaf as a shooter when they've been in the league 6 years and they're 28.
Yeah, and I don't think his fit with Cooper Flag is a great one because they both kind of want to do the same thing, which is attack off the dribble and get to the cup. And so Cooper, I think, needs as much shooting around him as possible. Where I would like Marshall more is you really going to need a coach to unlock him creatively. I think actually teaching him to be a screener and a guy who could make plays in the pocket could be extremely powerful because of that floater game. And
Interesting.
he
Hmm.
and so if you could use him there, certainly pairing him with more of a stretch five would work. Now, maybe that would be more lineup, say with PJ Washington at center, Cooper Flag at the 4, and then Marshall could play more of that screener role, or he could obviously play on the ball in transition. He's very useful too because he just is going to keep. They call him the knife, right? Like he just will keep going to the basket until you stop him, and so I think that's a really useful mentality. And obviously, defensively, he can hold up quite a bit as well. And so I think, and you know, maybe you can stash him in the corner at times. You can shoot a little bit more. I think that's been part of the problem too. Is just that like this hasn't been a group overall that's emphasized the 3-pointer. I mean, remember he got signed to play with Luka Doncic, and we never really got to see what that was going to look like. And or the other thing you can hope too is, all right, if teams help off of him, like just he cuts down the lane and he can make that floater again that way. Maybe that's part of what it looks like there too. But the whole overall ecosystem in terms of their lack of shooting and just having a weird offense versus Cooper Flag playing point guard, then he's not. The point guards they have are ineffective. They move Cooper back to point guard, and but they don't really have that many guys who can dribble. So you're probably asking him to do a lot more of that as well. So I think you really have to figure out a way to leverage his strengths, but his ability to make a shot that it's very difficult for the defense to defend is something that's useful. You just got to really use your brain and put the right personnel around him to get the most out of that, because he's not your prototypical 3-and-D type of player. All right, then. Well, this was fun. We went well over 2 hours on this 15 and 60. Hope you all enjoyed this one, and we'll be back tomorrow exclusively on Dunc'd on Prime. Till then.